seen you here. Here I am.
Here you
Hey,
are. Oh, there you are. How are you?
I'm fine, Ellen. How are you?
So happy to see you.
Thank you. You too.
You look well.
I'm going to be 90.
No,
Yes.
really.
Yes. Oh, 109.
109. Oh my gosh. November.
The day
What?
that Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address, the 19th.
The 19th. I knew it was in November, but I forgot the day.
But how are you? Where are you living?
I'm living in Haverford
Great.
in a condo, and I'm busy
Great.
with my clay and
Great.
pottery and doing classes and
Wonderful.
just keeping busy.
We see
My-
Helen. We're so happy
hear
that
that.
Helen comes every week with us.
Yeah, Helen and I haven't seen each other in a long time.
Oh, that's so nice. I'm glad to.
I love her to death.
Oh, dear.
Yes.
Right.
Don't love her
It's
to death.
neutral.
Have good times. We
Well,
had good times,
We
Helen.
certainly did. You were wild.
And not to mention you too.
Who, me? No.
Yes.
I was somber.
Not a word I would use for Helen. Exuberant. That's my
She
word.
is exuberant. That's right.
I'm still doing the same thing. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. You are a treasure.
I have not stopped.
You are a national treasure.
Absolutely. Definitely. Right. I am waiting for Temple University to arrive at any second because we discovered 4 cartons of poetry books that were given
Really?
in 1952, 47, and 36 when he was
Oh my goodness.
That is
Oh my gosh.
That's not
Helen.
anything. And
Oh,
so we're
really?
sending, we're what? We're
Oh, I
sending,
was just saying that we're getting so many people coming on, so I was just saying hi to everybody.
you look wonderful, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Natural light. I'm so
You really
excited.
do. You
So
look
many
great.
people coming in. We're so excited to have George with us today. He is at Temple right now. He's at Tyler School of Art in his studio. He's and this is his 2nd year at Tyler, which is very exciting.
Great. Wonderful.
So,
Helen, I'm sorry I can't send people to retrieve those books sooner. I don't have any.
Well, they're coming. They're coming any minute. I'm waiting for them.
and
But they're going to your library, George.
Ah,
They're going to the Temple University Library,
I'm going to take Helen over next week to see the show.
right? I'm coming to see the exhibition, right? Absolutely. And in addition, there will be many ceramic books coming to Temple as well.
Oh, good.
Mm.
We're very excited. Thank you for doing that, Helen. So I think we'll wait one more minute to see, and then we will get started. We're very excited, as I said, and we have even, it's not perfect, but we have this very interesting 3D image of the exhibition. So it's a little bit misaligned because I'm still not very good at this. Evidently it's a skill to use these 3D scanny things. But okay, I think we'll get started. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm just going to give you a bit of history on George before we get started. George Rodriguez is a graduate of the University of Washington's MFA program for ceramics and earned a BFA from the University of Texas, El Paso. He was the featured artist for Foster White Gallery at the Seattle Art Fair in 2018, where he presented his first Mexican Zodiac series. An iteration of that series was also featured at the Museum of Northwest Art in the fall of 2018, honoring him as the recipient of the Museum of Northwest Art's Luminaries Patty Warashina Award for Emerging Artists, which is especially wonderful for those of us in the ceramics community. His solo exhibition, Guardians, ran at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art in the spring of 2018. His work has been acquired by the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago and is part of many prestigious public and private collections around the country. Rodriguez continues to draw on his travels to 26 countries on 3 continents, backed by the Bonderman Travel Fellowship, which he was awarded in 2010. Expanding on his studies of global culture and ceremony, George seeks to bridge his Chicano heritage with Thai, Peruvian, Bolivian, Mongolian, Egyptian, Taiwanese, and Indonesian civilization and mythology. Oh, welcome, George. We are going to start out just asking George to give us a little bit of background on this exhibition and his other bodies of work. So take it away, George.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of my previous work and then really touch on the exhibition that's currently at the Clay Studio. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all.
We made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Great. Okay, and let me know if you can see the first image.
Oh, wow.
Great. So I just have, I've made a lot of work since I started working in clay, probably in my first ceramics class was in 2004, roughly. And that was as an undergraduate at the University of Texas in El Paso, UTEP. So I'm going to skip through a bunch of different work, and not really show too much from my time in undergrad and graduate school, but I'll show you more or less like what I'm doing these days. Even in undergraduate and graduate school, I was making a lot of self-portraiture. So that's really where I started, working with the figure and pretty much working with myself as a reference to journal, to express stories that I wanted to tell, to just basically like create these narratives that really focused around my experience within community and my experience of just like navigating the world, the art world, family, friends. So this is a self-portrait with flowers, and the flowers is a decorative technique, the sprigging, that I've kind of taken on as like added narrative and added symbolism to the sculptures that I make. In 2017, my work started to kind of lean into a little bit more political realm. And that's something that I hadn't been so aware of before 2016. So this is a self-portrait, just kind of addressing my feelings of, the state of the union at that point. So for me, there was this kind of feeling of anger and feeling of despair and feeling of sadness. So I wanted to represent that through a series of portraits colored in, the colors of the American flag. I use a lot of, or I reference a lot of historical objects in my work. So I look at a lot of temple sculptures, ancient cultures, things like that. I also look at contemporary artists, but I do like these unknown makers that just have made beautiful objects that withstand the test of time. So I wanted to make something like an Olmec head, and this is the creation of one of those heads with a lot more decoration and a lot more ornamentation in that sprigging fashion that I've come to love. And this is that exhibition at the Foster White Gallery, which I've been with for almost 10 years now. So I was just talking with Jennifer earlier, and we've worked together for about 10 years. So this is the show Beneath the Surface, where I had a lot of these mostly like figurative head sculptures. I also have been looking at statuary from central Mexico, from Teotihuacan. And when I discovered these little figures that they unearthed in some of the pyramids, they were full of these small shells, and there were these stone sculptures. And there was something so moving about the simplicity of the form, but also the expression of the faces. I found, the open mouth and kind of this gaze to be very comforting in a way. So I started to think of them as companion figures. And also in 2017, I made a series of sculptures, figurative sculptures that were, that I've titled the Sanctuary series. And these sculptures were, for me, representative of friends and people that I felt were being marginalized. And I wanted to present them in, kind of like put them literally on a pedestal. So this is a self-portrait. Again, throughout the different bodies of work that I make, I tend to make a self-portrait of myself to just like test the waters a little bit. And this is addressing my Mexican-American upbringing. So We the People. This is in hijab. And at this point, I was also making sculptures that were addressing communities and cultures that I was not a part of. So I started to do a lot more research to figure out how I can properly represent these cultures that I am not 100% immersed in. So the in hijab figure had representation of Islamic tiles on the surface of the dress and the form. And these are a few other sculptures from that series: Hands Up, Pride, and Venus. So I initially made those in Seattle, but then I had the opportunity to travel that exhibition to my home town in El Paso, Texas. And for that, I made a couple other figures, these large Uncle Sam and Tia Katrina, which for me represented the border that I grew up in. So I grew up in the States, I grew up in Texas, but El Paso is right on the border with Juarez, Mexico. So there's a lot of, most people are binational. The language is Spanish primarily. There's a lot of movement. So I wanted these two figures to be very different, but also very equal. So they have the same height, and they were these guardians to this exhibition. So you kind of had to walk through the border in order to enter the diversity that lay behind it. And this is a newer piece along the same lines where the forms are kept simple, but this is my new Mexican-American Gothic. And I made this before, the pandemic hit, just thinking about essential workers really, and how a lot of how we function in our day-to-day is thanks to people that can put in the work to make us function or allow us to function.
Mm.
So, and you can see some of the tiles in the background that you'll see in the current exhibition. So that sanctuary work was very heavy for me. Like when I was doing the research, when I was making the figures, just like talking to friends, all of it felt very heavy as I was making it and presenting it. So this is my lovely partner, Marisol. And this is actually Princess Mildred. So it's not Marisol, that's Princess Mildred in the photograph. And that's a portrait of Princess Mildred next to that photo. So the queen is a representation of Princess Mildred personified as a lion. And you can see the clown nose on the tail there. So I needed to bring a little joy back into the making and not just the weight of it. And that's when I started to make these Zodiac vases. So these are based on the Chinese Zodiac. So the 12 animals correlate to a year of birth. So I'm the year of the dog, which is the last image on the bottom right corner. And then with the year of the dog, or with the Chinese Zodiac, I wanted to represent them into a Mexican Zodiac. And this was based on Ai Weiwei's Circle of Animals, these like beautiful, wonderful bronze sculptures. So I took the dragon and I reinterpreted that dragon into El Quetzalcoatl, which is a feathered serpent. And as Jennifer mentioned, this is one of the series of those animal heads. So this is mounted currently at the University of Washington in their computer science building. And I've made 4 versions of this so far. This is the alebrijes version, which the coloration is similar to alebrijes, which are these small wooden painted animals from the Oaxaca region of Mexico. And then this is the Metálico version, which is also made out of clay, but glazed in this kind of bronzy glaze to reference the original Ai Weiwei rendering of the animals. And currently I'm working on a 5th version where I'm collaborating with 13 other Mexican or Chicano AX artists that will finish the animal that correlates to the year of their birth. So I'm really excited. That's kind of ongoing currently. And then, as Jennifer mentioned, I moved to Philadelphia last year or Marisol and I moved to Philadelphia last year, August. And this is the first body of work that I made at Temple University at the Tyler School of Art. And this is a large rat and a large pigeon as urban guardians. So I love being in an urban environment. I see these figures as essential to kind of the makeup of a city. They're around us, they're part of the city. And they can sometimes seem, they can be overlooked, but they really are, you know, kind of what give the flavors to living together. So I wanted to present them in this regal way. And these figures are about 5 feet tall each. So they are, you know, somewhat imposing if you walk towards them. And I showed this body of work back in Seattle. So I made them in Philadelphia. We loaded a truck this summer and we drove them across the country. So, and you know, that little drawing, I love to have the background of Seattle and the background of Philadelphia. It's kind of this merging of the 2 cities that I now like am a part of. And then I'm just going to backtrack a tiny bit. So I've been using skulls a lot in my work, and you'll see them in this current exhibition. But this is called Offering in White, which is what I think of as a roadside altar. So I wanted this like beautiful offering, but also with, you know, like the idea or the imagery of death on the bottom. So you can see the little skulls that mimic like the sugar skulls. I love Posada's etchings, not etchings, what are they? Like engravings. So I love his work, and I've always looked at this image as inspiration. So I made my own version of his Katrina in 3D, and I wanted to keep that kind of newsprint quality to the work. This is a small shrine as an object of my affection, with again those little skulls and an overabundance of flowers. Santita Muerte is kind of the unofficial saint of death of Mexico. So skulls have been present in my work for a long time as just like imagery of life and death. Also, altars have been present in my work for a long time. So this is an altar that I made in collaboration with Pottery Northwest in Seattle. So we built this giant kiln. I made these this kind of stacking sculpture. And it wasn't as dramatic as I hoped, but you can see it on the far right image. We fired the piece, we opened up the kiln, and then all the participants were able to write down their fears or their hopes or their wishes, and then we threw them onto the piece, and then they, you know, combusted into fire, and we kind of send them out into the world. So this is what that piece is now. It's not exactly the same one that was in the kiln, as I had to remake a couple pieces, but this is the finished version of that. And for me, this altar kind of correlates to the very top, what I call the crown, is people, but the people are only visible because of everything that's beneath it. So the foundation, which is faith and death, primal, which is our like animal instincts, and then the elements that make up the world. And then lastly, Reflect and Gather was a project where I started to really focus on making tiles. And Reflect and Gather was this installation where we would reflect on community, but then gather with community as well. So I invited people into my studio to help me make the tiles. So we had different groups that, we made over 6,000 tiles for this project. And you can see them loaded into my cart kiln and drying on some of the racks. So it really felt like production. That's Liz Wiegand on the left there, kind of explaining the painting process for these tiles. So not only did the community help me make the tiles, but they also helped me paint all of these tiles. That's Gustavo Martinez. He helped me build these small reflection rooms that were about 6 by 6 feet squared. And you can see the stick build out in the background of the environment image. And what we ended up creating was this, this installation where there was a plaza in the middle for people to gather and have conversation and really kind of foster community. But then there were these reflection rooms that you could walk into that were fully decorated. On the inside, they were ornate, like on the walls, there was tiles on the floor, there were tiles on the ceiling. You could close the door and be completely surrounded. And I wanted people to have the opportunity to reflect on conversations that they had in the gathering space. So it really was this twofold thing, like build community, talk to community, but then take time to absorb and, contemplate what those conversations were. And then the last portion of that installation was this kind of live room that was completely wet clay. So same thing, wet clay on the floor, on the walls. So then people could manipulate, add their touch, add some imagery, do some text, whatever they wanted to the walls. And as more people came through the space, more and more, traces of that of those people were left behind. So you could see that it started to grow over time. So that leads me to La Flor, el Nicho y sus Memorias, which is the flower, the nook, and its memories. And for me, this is an altar space that I was creating at the Clay Studio. So this is the show that's currently up at the Clay Studio at the Bonovitz Gallery. And the first time I saw that gallery, it was so intimate. It really was this embracing space. So I wanted to create one of these rooms. And these are just a couple images of me installing the work. So put a little bit of black paper on the back to kind of deepen the space. And then these tiles were made so that they can just screw onto the wall and be removed, because, that previous show was temporary. This show is temporary. So I want to make sure that I can reuse these tiles without grouting them and damaging any of the walls. So along with creating this altar in this, this kind of enclosed space, I wanted to help foster community with this project too, or just like let people know that we're still in it together, even though we aren't all physically together, right? Like, we don't have openings where we're all grouped together, but by leaving little offerings and little figures, then you can tell like, oh, somebody else was here as well. And then over the course of the month, hopefully that can accumulate and you can be like, okay, more people have been here. We're still involved. We're still part of this grouping. So for me, it's been really fun to just see these little offerings come through. And I made these skulls and left them in the corner, so you can take them and include them in the work, or you can just make your own little offering, and they can go in the nooks, they can go all around the figure, but eventually, like the other work, things just come to life in a way. And I want to thank Raymond for taking these like wonderful photographs. So the photographs of the exhibition were taken at the studio there. So thank you, Raymond. And that's my last image. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk and have some questions. But
yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, George.
Yeah.
I realized when you started talking that I didn't actually introduce that we are, this is the virtual clay studio. This is a lunch and learn. I'm Jennifer Zwilling, the curator at the clay studio. And to say, I'll just say thank you again to all the people who are with us. The numbers have been growing as you've been talking, and we also are live streaming on Facebook. So hi to the Facebook people. And I will take this little interim to remind people that you can come to visit in person. We have great controls. You can only have 6 people at a time in the gallery. Masks are mandatory, of course, but as George so eloquently put, we want to be able to have people remember that we're all in this together. And I love what you said, and it's so true that you walk in and you're like, oh, other people have been here. Which is not normally a thing that you really can sense when you're visiting an exhibition. So that's a really powerful thing to have right at this moment. So we're really happy about that. So I want to start by just having a conversation with George, and then I saw people putting things in the chat towards the end. We will go back and read those. And if you, towards the end, if you want to unmute yourself to ask questions, that's totally fine too. I'm gonna start by asking George my standard first question, which is, when did you realize that you wanted to be an artist, and how did you come to clay in that progress?
Yeah. So when did I realize I wanted to be an artist? I've always enjoyed drawing primarily, right? And that was my first like introduction to art, right? So like drawing, doodling. I took an art class in 6th grade. I had to choose between music and visual arts. Like we couldn't do both, so I went the visual arts route. But then over time, I just like found myself like, you know, most middle school, high school kids just like doodling on their notes. But then when I entered undergrad, I knew that I wanted to pursue something in the artistic realm. I didn't know what that was. And for me, that meant initially graphic design. And graphic design because I was the first in my family to finish college. And when I entered, like I have 4 older sisters, and they're all, you know, wonderful and extremely supportive. And when I entered undergrad, I knew that I had to come out with the perspectives of getting a job. And I knew from an early stage that art was difficult to get a job in, like the visual arts. It's just very hard. So I went in for graphic design, but luckily the program at UTEP, you're required to take intro to painting, intro to metals, intro to ceramics. And I actually took ceramics first because I knew nothing about the medium. And I'm like, I'm not interested in making pottery or figurines. And that was my perception of ceramics at the time. And I took it first just to kind of get it out of the way, and fell in love with it. And I had a great mentor. I'm sorry, Jennifer.
And now you make pottery and figurines.
Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
Totally, yeah, 100%. And I had a great mentor, Vincent Burke, who's still teaching there, who, you know, was my mentor and is now my good friend. So yeah, but he just showed me, he like just opened the doors and let me know that there's endless possibilities. So
what do you think was it about the clay that grabbed you?
You know, I was a painting minor at the same time, but the clay was difficult, so I liked that challenge. I felt an ease with painting at that time that I didn't feel with clay. I couldn't control it the way that I wanted to, and also, you know, like the tactility of it, the fact that I could just manipulate it and change it with my hands. And I failed a lot. Like a lot of things broke. I was impatient, so I would build and they would just like collapse under its own weight. But I liked that challenge of like, okay, I'm gonna do it again and better. So
I love to hear that the reason you liked it was because you weren't good at it at first. I don't think that that's I think that's something to be proud of. Yeah, because there's a lot of people who don't do things because they get frustrated. So that's really great. And you do need that spirit to be a ceramic artist, because the kiln will break your heart. So that's good. And then that kind of answers my next question, I guess, a bit, which is, I mean, I think it's a very brave decision to become an artist. So you went in as graphic design, you got excited about ceramics. Did you realize at that moment that you could do it for the rest of your life, or did you kind of like think it was going to be a hobby? And how did that play out after college, I guess? Or
Yeah, I went in for graphic design. I didn't really enjoy that, and I switched to art education, so to be able to teach at middle school, high schools, and pursue that. But then I just kept spending all of my time in the ceramic studio, and that's where a lot of my focus was. So after my third year, I finally walked up to my mother and I said I think I'm gonna get a BFA in ceramics. And and I was nervous to do that. But she was so supportive and said, that's great. As long as you finish college, I'm happy. And for me, I also realized okay, then I need to pursue an MFA. And the MFA for me gave me, it was my security to be able to teach at higher education. So that's really what I wanted out of the MFA. I found so much more. I found time to focus and talk and build the work that I needed to build. But once I decided that I would get a BFA, I also decided that I would pursue an MFA after that.
that makes sense. So was it harder to tell your mom or your four sisters?
It was definitely harder to tell my mother. Even still, I think maybe a little less now, but she always expects me to go back to El Paso to live. I always tell her that that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. So that was hard because the MFA meant that I would leave my hometown.
Yeah.
And then the first time that I had a solo show, which for me was a big deal, solo show in a gallery, big deal. I told my mother and she was like, that's great. And the first time that I had an adjunct teaching position, she was over the moon, right? Because teaching means security, whereas the solo show, which was bigger for me, we weren't in that world to know what a solo show is.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And you always want your kids to live near you. So I can see what real success to her is when you get to move home.
Yeah.
Got it. So I think that this really ties in, the idea of your family and how important they are to you, ties into your love of working and building community. So I was really excited to learn that you traveled to so many different countries. There's a couple of questions brewing in my mind, but I think the first one is, can you think of a travel story that had the greatest impact on your idea of community kind of across the globe? Did you experience something that felt familiar to you that you wanted to kind of emphasize in your own work? I see you looking to other cultures for inspiration, and with so many different countries, what was the most important experience that you had? If you can answer that, I don't know.
Yeah. So I was able to travel because of the Bonderman Travel Fellowship. So that was through the University of Washington. At that time, it was $20,000 for travel, and you had to travel to non-Western parts of the world. So Western Europe was out of the question, Australia out of the question. So they wanted you to explore places that weren't similar to the U.S. in at least culture-wise. So I ended up going to South America, to Japan, Korea, South Korea, and China, and then Southeast Asia as well, and the Balkan region. So I really kind of took advantage and jumped around a lot. But for me, there was a couple things. The people, right? So I always kind of go back to the people. Traveling by yourself, backpacking, your loneliness sets in. So the best way to combat that is to make friends and talk to other travelers and talk to locals. So I have so many friends still to this day from that journey of traveling that we just leaned on each other to make the best of our, of our experiences and search different places together and go on walks and just have these conversations. And one of the things that really stuck with me was how similar everybody around the world is. Like everyone's just the same everywhere. Like we want the same things. We want to make connections. We want to be happy. Most people are very helpful and just want to help each other and want to introduce you to things that brings them joy. So I found that so rewarding. And before that, my idea of traveling or my idea of different parts of the world were based on what I would see in the news or what I would, see in movies. And that doesn't always depict things in the best light. So it was nice to just talk to people. Over time, I did take a lot of photographs. So then I started to build these connections of imagery from different parts of the world. And I typically reference, as an example, the Hanuman figures from Thailand, which are these beautiful, almost very ornate monkey gods. And they have these fangs and they're just really wonderful. And then there's these demons from these festivals in Peru that are pretty much the same face. And if I have a slide where I put them side by side and they almost look identical, but one's like a Catholic procession demon and then one's the Hanuman god, but the image is exactly the same. So I like these connections where aesthetically they're the same, but then culturally they seem different. And now I try and bridge that with the work that I'm making and find those connections.
That's fascinating. And I like the way that happens also in mythologies around the world. You'll find the same story pattern in a Chinese mythology as you do in sort of Greek mythology and those kinds of things. And what you're saying too about everyone being the same and looking for joy, those images that you're looking at are how we see ourselves or how we see our best selves, if they're sort of godlike creatures. So it is fascinating that they can be so similar. And then that brings me to the next idea about it seems that your work is very focused on actively building community and doing something using the physicality of the ceramic process. So can you tell us a little bit about how that grew in your thinking? And do you think of yourself as having kind of a mission statement for yourself as an artist? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do try to actively build that community, and it's for selfish reasons. I want to be part of these communities. I want to feel embraced by people, and I also want to provide a space where people can just gather. So when I initially moved to Seattle, I didn't realize how much I missed my hometown. I was a little homesick, specifically not hearing Spanish around the university where I was in Seattle. So that's really where it started for me. El Paso is a Spanish-speaking town, so you can hear the music, you can hear the language, you can eat the food. And then all of that was taken away from me when I moved to Seattle for the most part. So I had to make an effort to find that within the space. And I realized that you're not always in a place of comfort, but you can find these communities that you feel embraced and comforted with if you look and search. So that's what I try and do with my work. I try and create an environment that people can come and gather and then exchange ideas. Moving to Philadelphia, it's been difficult with the pandemic. I mean, for many reasons, but one of them is that we can't gather and we can't socialize the way that I hope to. So, you know, I want to, the clay studio, I told Jennifer this a while ago, but the clay studio was wonderful because the day that Marisol and I drove in to the city, Nick Lenker was giving a talk at the clay studio. And I felt very comfortable just like going to that space and sitting and listening to a talk, because I know ceramics and I know kind of the clay community, and I felt embraced by that community. I met Nick the previous year because we were both emerging artists at MCCA the same year. So we walked in and we kind of felt embraced by that community already. So we were lucky to have this kind of landing space. Marisol, my partner, is in theater, so she has the theater community that she was embraced by. And now we're starting to like grow that bubble, because, you know, we want to feel comfortable and in the space that we're living in. So I try and do that with my artwork, even in some of the objects, even if it's not an installation space. Like the altar for me is a space to gather around. It's not just, you know, a singular object. It's for people to come together.
And it's only completed when the people are there.
Yeah, without people, it doesn't do anything.
Maybe that's what's missing from the photo, or from that weird 3D thing that I can show.
Oh yeah, you should show that
I'll do
3D.
the weird 3D thing because I keep talking about it. Hold on. Yeah, I imagine that it was kind of right when you were starting to feel part of Philadelphia that the pandemic hit, and right when you sort of could have, anyway, well, hopefully it'll be over at some point next year.
You know, and that's another nice thing about, you know, I'm very fortunate. I'm the artist in residence at the Tyler School of Art. So that's another community that I'm a part of. You know, the faculty, wonderful faculty in all the departments, and then the lively student body. And, you know, getting to know people that grew up here, and also people that are just like studying here. So.
Yeah, Tyler is a great community. Okay, so everyone can tell that this is wrong. See the head of the sculpture is like misaligned, but oops. Oh, play. What happened? Oh, hold on one sec. Oh, there was a way to make it so that it flew in. It's not working. Anyway, so you can, it's all misaligned, but here's a sort of interesting way that you can see that you walk into the space and you really feel embraced. The lights are dim and sort of dramatic, and so you really walk in and just feel kind of a calm set come over you. Maybe that's part of my love of decorative arts and pattern, but the fact that you're surrounded by color and pattern kind of makes me just relax. And you know that you have some time in there alone, and you can kind of look around, and you start to notice that the colorways of the tiles change subtly, and just the chance to stand there and look at it is really special. And then you can kind of pick up one of these little skulls and make yourself a little offering to leave. And it's pretty great. So because this is not accurate, it's just another good reason for people to come into the real space and visit us.
We were saying that there's so much information in the tile. There's just like so much texture that maybe the camera's having a hard time adjusting to like grouping all of those little blocks together. And then yeah, Jennifer, I
broke the program.
And I would also, encourage, if you do come through, I would be happy if you, if you want to leave a note, like the altar is really an altar for you to leave whatever you want to leave. So if you want to make an object with the clay, that's great. If you want to write a note, that's great. Like if you want to leave a photo of somebody that you love, that's wonderful. So like all of that is, it's good to just send energy out into the world that you want to be out. So,
well, so we have we do have a guest book out as well, and I love it when people leave their comments, but it's nice that that's a good idea too. We can put out some paper, and the little balls of clay are sort of in appropriately plastic wrapped, so you don't have to worry. Sure. And then on November 1st, which is Dia de los Muertos, George is going to come back, and actually he and I will physically be in the space, and we're going to have another Zoom where we sort of accept all the offerings, and we're going to invite all of you to come back for that. So it should be fun to kind of have a culmination again, because we can't meet in person. But there are also, if anyone wants to come in and make an appointment, I'd be happy to give you a tour, and I bet there's some time for George to come in as well, so we can keep things to 4 people. So anyone can let me know if they're interested in that kind of thing. So I have more questions, of course. I noticed that you both work in very large scale in your sculpture. And even when you're working with something small like a tile, it becomes large. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the ability to make those large objects, because I mean, that's quite an undertaking. And again, I'll just use the word bravery to sort of work big like that. Can you think of a moment where you were like, I'm just going to make the biggest sculpture I can think of?
I'm always thinking of like the biggest sculpture I can make. Still, like always. I haven't made it yet. I'm still like working on the bigger one. But I work pretty fast. So you know, with the tiles, I had a lot of people helping me make those tiles. So that's the only way that project really came together. But with some of the objects, I can build pretty quickly. I feel confident in my building ability at this point. But also, because I feel like I can build rather quickly, I'm also not afraid of failures. And you know, inevitably in the clay, in ceramics, like there might be a crack, there might be things that fall apart, etc. Before I used to have like a 50-50 chance. My percentage is better now as I've learned some things, but when things don't work out, I'll just remake it. I find that that's okay, and I can really just work on pieces again. So with the larger work, like it seems like there's a lot of ornamentation, a lot of coloring that goes into it. So it does hurt a little bit. Like that day I'll be upset. I might just like go home and take a nap, or go home and eat something, or, you know, like watch something on television just to kind of ease my mind. But the next day I'm back just like starting over, because there's no reason to dwell on it. It's just part of the process. So I want to just show, I have this image that I didn't show in this slideshow, but I'm just going to pull it up really quick if that's okay.
Sure. Oh, there you go. Great.
Okay, so it's these. This was a sculpture for my this was like my thesis work at the University of Washington, which are 9 large mariachi figures. Mm-hmm. And I won't go through the whole building of this, but I made 8 of these initially, and then they, you know, I had friends help, but they broke throughout that process. So like I was trying to be cheap with the amount of clay I was using. So I made the walls way too thin. They weren't like the best engineered objects, and they're about 6 feet tall. So then we tried to get one into the kiln. This happened to it. We tried to get a second one into the kiln. Like it crushed as we were trying to lift it. So we really struggled to move the pieces. And I made 8. And eventually I went into my studio after 2 of them broke, and like destroyed the other 6, and then started from scratch again.
Mm.
Which that was probably one of the hardest things, because it was a lot of work that went into the making of these objects. And eventually, you know, I was able to finish them and remake them, and that's the end piece of those figures. But if I stand in front, you know, they're a lot taller than me. I'm 6 feet tall. On their on their boots and with their heads, they're probably closer to 8 to 8.5 feet or so, something like that.
And
Um,
are the boots and the hats separate?
The heads are separate, so the heads and the feet are separate, and then now the instruments are all attached to the work, but the heads just kind of sit inside, almost like a bobblehead.
Oh, someone's asking what kind of clay.
So I was using Akio Takamori's clay body, who was he's a mentor of mine. That clay is a cone 6 mid-range, but it has 30% grog, so it's like very, very sandy. Like it'll sand your fingerprints off, basically.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it stand up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I will go over to the questions, because we have some questions in the chat. And then, so you talked about Akio. Was he one of the people who kind of encouraged you to work big, or how was it in your MFA days that you kind of made that jump? What was the first big thing you did?
Yeah, it was my MFA more so. So in my undergrad, the biggest kiln was a little under 3 feet in height. So that I was making figures that were about 3 feet. And then when I went to the University of Washington, they had a kiln that I could stand inside of. So then I decided, okay, well, I'm gonna take advantage of the equipment. So I made larger and larger pieces based on what was available for me to work. And that's before I realized that I could make things in sections and then stack them up. So now I can go beyond my capacity of kiln and make things fit. But then I was building to like the height. So 6 feet was my limit. Tyler has some really wonderful kilns here. So, like I've been taking advantage of that. They're intimidating to most people, but I'm like, let's try it out. Why not?
And the sectional pieces, as a person who installs artwork, it's really nice when it's not just one giant thing. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
And for shipping too. Otherwise, I mean, it's more dangerous for shipping.
You know, with those mariachi figures, moving one of them, fine. Like I got that down. By the time I got to the 9th one, I was just like sore and tired and sweaty, and I hated all of it. So I understand.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So Raymond was talking, when this was from much earlier, and he said that one of your pieces was like carved jade from the Maya civilization. Kel, when she saw your rat sculpture, said, "I never felt so excited to be a rat." So I get she's year of the rat. And it was a lithograph, somebody says.
Awesome.
Diane. Michelle says, I look forward every Thursday to be a learner. Today's artist is truly gifted. I think so too. Was the tall rat at one of the Nsika exhibitions? Was that?
The tall rat has not been to Nsika. I had a small rat that I made for the Clay National at the Clay Studio, but the tall rat I just finished earlier this year, I think maybe in February, and the first place that I showed it was in Seattle.
Got it. Deanne's asking about how the tiles attach to the wall, and thank you, it's amazing work. So you had 2 screw holes, right? But you only ended up using 1.
Mm-hmm. And I only used 1 because, so 2 are for aesthetics, right? Like I wanted to kind of even out and be symmetrical with the shape of the tile. But I was trying to save the walls a little bit of the Clay Studio because there's still, 1,000 screw holes probably in that wall. So there's 1 false wall, but then I used 2 of the gallery walls. So I apologize to whoever's doing all the patching. But I did only use one screw instead of both.
There's only 1,000 instead of 2,000 holes. Well, I think we're just gonna skim coat the walls after, which is fine. And we only have 10 more months in this building, so it's fine.
That's exciting.
Says clay will get you every time. That was when you were talking about getting excited about clay. And he also asks, while you're in Philadelphia, if you visited the UPenn Museum, which is an amazing archaeological museum. They have lots of ceramic sculptural examples from around the world. You can really see how people have more in common than differences. So they're probably reopened now. That's a really good idea, Raymond. That's a great space. And Raymond took pictures of people at the altar, which I can show. And we have our friend Margarita Hagen, another ceramic artist who was asking about clay temperatures and also would like to meet you. She's from Seattle. So
Great. I'd love to meet you. And you know, I use primarily that Accio clay body. Again, it's a cone 6 stoneware. But sometimes I want like a reddish clay because of the sculpture that I'm making, and I want it to be deeper and more earthy. So then I'll move to a cone 6 red stoneware. I primarily use stoneware in what I'm making, but I've made terracotta pieces and you know, a few porcelain pieces, but stoneware cone 6 is usually where I end up living. And most of my, I know nobody asked about the finish, but most of it is just like commercial finish with commercial underglaze. So it's all matte with a black stain behind it so that it deepens the colors a little bit more. It almost antiques them. And then there's little hints of glaze just to catch your eye from a distance. So you get a little bit of that reflection, but most of it is matte.
that actually brings up the really interesting connections, visual connections between your work and Lisa Naples's work, and Lisa's in the other exhibition space. And she also, on her plates, and I guess on the rabbits, there's like a black slip underlayment, and then the color is on top, and it's a little bit more like a satin finish, but it has a bit of that same kind of chocolatey color texture. And so interesting, just like you said, it's completely different work. She's a totally different artist, but without even realizing it, when we put your two bodies of work next to each other, you just start to see similarities. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, me too. Her work is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting to have these two exhibitions up. I really hope that people, as they feel comfortable, do come in, make an appointment, or just come in. We really haven't had to turn anyone away. So we are keeping our numbers down, and it's very safe. So do come in and check it out on the website, and tune in again on November 1st when we have an as yet to be determined Day of the Dead celebration to figure that out. So I just want to thank George again for spending this hour with us, and all of your lucky students at Tyler. I'm so pleased that you're here in Philadelphia, and I keep pushing for you to stay. So we'll see if Philadelphia can come back to life enough to be an exciting community for you to stay here in Philly.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you everybody for joining us. I've had a wonderful time. And Philly's great. I love Philly. So
great. Okay. Well, and people are saying thank you in the chat, and thanks to everyone. And we'll see all of you next Thursday when we talk to some of our continuing resident artists in our program. And have a lovely week, everyone. Enjoy the weather. See you again. Thanks, George.
everyone, thanks.
Bye. Oh, Raymond says Penn Museum is open. Gorgeous work, says Felisa. Thank you for inspiring. Thank you, thank you.
Yay. And we live in West Philly, so we can walk to, it's probably like a 20 to 25-minute walk to the Penn Museum. So
that's good. Have you been to the Woodlands? The cemetery? You can go to picnics there?
A lot. Especially during the, from March to and throughout the summer, like that was the one place that I could go that felt comfortable enough to spend some time in.
That's great. Oh, and then Bartram's Garden is over there too, if you ever have a chance.
Mm-hmm. been there a lot too.
Oh. If you go down by the river, sometimes you can find pottery shards,
Oh,
like,
cool.
you know, old stuff. Well, not that old, but a couple 100 years old.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna really go now. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Raymond.